I think this is the episode where everybody falls in love with Bruno's character. What I mainly mean is if you're an anime only, and you haven't read the manga, and if you weren't already a big fan of Bruno's character, then this episode will make you a fan of Bruno, because the demonstration of what his character can do, how far he will go to protect his squad, is pretty endearing, and just, it makes you love his character, how far he goes. I mean, this mini arc, this little arc we have with these past couple episodes, it is Bruno's arc. But it's not just Bruno, it's also Fishy. It's both of their arcs. These two characters were the main central pieces of this arc. I know many might instantly think Prosciutto is the most important out of the two stand users that attacked our group, but that is really not the case. When you look at this episode and you take a good look at what happened, you realize Prosciutto was never the biggest threat. Even though he has an AoE stand, the Grateful Dead, that can just straight up age people until they die, it's a scary stand. It's broken. I've talked about it. But even though it's a scary stand, when you look at something like what Fishy was able to do, then you start to realize who truly is the scarier stand user. The only thing that was holding Fishy back was just his lack of confidence, not really having the resolve to go all in. And so when you look at everything that this episode did, it developed Bruno, but it also developed Fishy. And it showed how JoJo isn't a series that just focuses on the MC or just the good guys. It also focuses on the villains, which is one of the reasons why I loved Part 4 so much, was because Yoshikage Kira was an amazing villain. The way we had so much focus on him, seeing his thought process and why he did certain things, it made him for a very entertaining villain, why many loved him, and why he's still a very iconic villain in JoJo, all the parts combined. But this right here, Part 5, when we get to see events like this with, two stand users popping up, working together to fight our main cast of characters, it's actually a rarity. It's really rare. I mean, think back on this. It's rare to see multiple stand users fighting together to bring down the good guys. Normally, it's usually a 1v1. And I mean, when you look at the formula, even in Part 5, it's kind of been like that already. But this arc is very different. It is a very different arc of JoJo. It has two stand users that are pretty much friends, like the equivalent of the good guys, but on the villain side, working together to bring down Bruno and the entire group. It's an interesting mix-up to the story, because like I said, usually that is not what happens. Usually you would have a 1v1, let's say Prosciutto versus Bruno, and that would be it. Chop it up, we'll move over to Fishy next. That's usually what would happen, but like I said, that did not happen. You had it to where two stand users fighting one guy, or actually 2v2, and then it was, 2v1. That's what happened, and I think that is why many respect JoJo but love this arc so much, and why Part 5 is one of the best arcs of JoJo from what I have heard, because of just how Araki really goes in and mixes things up. I mean, as I've already talked about when we started this series with, episode 1 of JoJo Part 5, I said that this is a very violent part. It's very violent compared to all the previous parts, which, don't get me wrong, Part 1 through 4 is already violent, but Part 5 really kicks it up to the next level. You would think there would be a lot more censorship, and there has been some slightly, but not to the extreme to where they really remove anything. I mean, the entire Prosciutto stuff, when he was underneath the train, crunched up into a ball, I'm like, yo, like, they're legit showing that. Like, it was a brutal scene, because the man, his body was so disfigured and messed up thanks to the train, and he was barely holding on. You're just like, how is he even alive? And, that's another thing I like about this arc, because Araki didn't really play favorites. Like, he didn't just have, let's say the villains getting wrecked and, that's it. He had it to where the good guys got wrecked and the villains got wrecked, and you had it to where they both were struggling at death's door. Like, let's look at Mista for a second, okay? Mista, in the last episode, he was messed up. He got messed up. Like, you don't even really know if he's even alive right now. I mean, his stand is still activated, but we don't know if he's going to survive the wounds, like if he's going to bleed out or not. That's still left up for debate after this episode. The point still stands, though, is that Mista got messed up, and he did hold on as long as he could to the very end. And that's exactly what Prosciutto did in this episode. He was in Mista's situation. His body completely messed up, couldn't move, really couldn't fight, but he had the Grateful Dead activated to keep the pressure on everybody in the train for they would continue to age. And so time was still ticking down for everyone, and so Bruno had that pressure in the back of his mind, not just fighting Fishy, but he also had to deal with someone's stand that still had its lingering presence, which that's what Fishy had to deal with. He had to deal with, Mista's stand that was helping out Bruno. So overall, I just like how Rocky didn't really play favorites. It was an equal playing field for both sides. They both went at each other with, I guess, fairness in this fight, and it wasn't, one side overwhelming the other. They were both on equal footing. And like I said, Bruno, what he did in this episode, he just became a fan favorite, at least for many, because of, what he did for his group. How he's a really good, leader, how he's a good, leader of his squad, and he's kind of like, the daddy of all of them. He watches over his children, making sure no harm is really going to come to them. And it just puts in perspective that, once again, this part is also very different from other JoJo's, because normally the JoJo, like, let's say Jotaro, Josuke, Joseph, aka, all of them, like any JoJo, usually the JoJo's are the main focus of the story. You see them a lot, they get a lot of development, they get a lot of fights, but we really haven't seen Giorno have many fights, which isn't a bad thing. It's just, we're seeing all these other characters really getting a lot of spotlight, for instance, Bruno. And so many are gonna fall in love with him. And it's not just that, he also had probably one of the best lines we've seen to date in JoJo, and I think the way the voice actor delivered his arty 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 arty, I think was the best I've seen. I mean, I really love Dio's performance in part 3, when he's like, "Za Waldo!" and all that, and the way the ending finale was done, great voice acting, but I think the performance of Bruno, his voice actor, did a fantastic job. Honestly, better than anything else we've seen from part 5. I mean, the voice acting's already been good, but it just like that really, I think, gave many chills. Fans of JoJo got chills from the goodbye scene from Bruno. Now, anyways, let's talk about Fishy. Fishy as a character, when you look at his design, you instantly want to make fun of him, judge him, and think he's irrelevant. And that's kind of the main charm to this arc. That's what makes this episode so amazing, is that Fishy as a character, he kind of is overshadowed by Prosciutto. Prosciutto is this monster, calculated serial killer that's a monster and will get the job done when he puts his mind to it. We've seen this. That was the whole point of his character in the last episode and this episode. And seeing how he was done in kind of like he was, and seeing Fishy take the mantle, many were probably like, how can this character really make up for Prosciutto's performance in the last episode? But when you see what goes down, you're like, whoa. Just the change, the resolve, how the man went so far, and how the villain got so much development to be able to bring down the good guys. I mean, when he's like, I finally took a life. This is the first time. It really isn't as hard as I thought. And you just see his face. It's hardened. He doesn't really care anymore. You can see he had a radical shift. He finally is manning up, and he's willing to take down the enemy and, carry on the legacy of Prosciutto and what he was trying to teach him. And you especially have to love that scene when he's thinking about what Prosciutto would do if he was in that situation, what, Prosciutto would say for, let's say, like, details, like, what he needed to do. And when he's thinking about him and all that, and he's like, oh, check it, or, he's still around, he didn't freak out, he kept his mind calm. It shows how scary he was and how scary his stand is, because you saw how he was very confident in his stand abilities. When someone was snagged, he knew who they were. He knew how much they weighed. He knew kind of how they are as a person. And he was able to figure out where his hook was and able to reel them in. Bruno, it was mainly just thanks to luck that he won in the end. I mean, he even mentions it was luck. But they both had so much resolve. But thankfully, Bruno's luck is what caused him to win. It wasn't the fact that, he was a better fighter. It just really came down to luck, and with the train bouncing his body parts back together before he could reform. Which, by the way, the heart-stopping scene, that was honestly in my opinion, better than the Jotaro heart-stopping scene. You remember in part 3 at the end when he's fighting Dio and he has to fake that he's dead, and so he puts Star Platinum to grab his heart and slow down his heartbeat to where Dio can't hear it? Well, in that moment of this episode, when you saw Bruno just chop his heart in half, you're like, whoa, this is like a Jotaro scene right here. I mean, the man's already holding his breath, but now he's straight up like, he chopped his heart where it wouldn't beat just for he could have the resolve and not be detected by Fishy at all. It was a ballsy move, and like I said, I fell in love with Bruno's character when I saw this for the first time, and I think many can agree with me. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much about it. Great episode of JoJo. What an arc. What a great arc. I mean, we have so much set up for the upcoming events, to the rest of the squad that's going to be hunting down Bruno and everybody else, to also Trish and her potential stand and what it's capable of. I mean, you have some form of dragon dinosaur-like footprint at the end, and so you're like, whoa, what is that? What's her stand really capable of? So, I mean, just so many questions, but man, what a good arc. David Productions, you're doing a fantastic job. So, I love you guys. You have a wonderful day or night wherever you live. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe. If you like this video, please leave a like. And with that, Chibi out.